So we come on the field before the game, just walking around, and Coach Bryant turns around to one of the managers and says, I want a helmet. So he just picked one up and gave it to him, and he said, I want one that fits. So, he asked him, well, Coach, what size do you wear? So he had to run around and find a helmet that fit him, and as we were walking out on the field, Coach Bryant put it on, and we walked around the end zone coming over by our bench, and of course that's where Tech's cheering section is, where their student body is. And as we were standing there, of course, they started lobbing some stuff, I don't know, lemons and some ice, some cups with ice in it and so forth. And I don't know if you look at the picture, you see you don't find many players around Coach Bryant. We're all kind of back in the background when we watched that stuff started coming out. But yeah, our coaches in the press box, our offense and defensive coaches, and they left 2 or 3 minutes prior to the half to come down and go into the dressing room to put the plays up and try to find out what they're doing or what we're doing wrong, and try to get ready for the second half. So with this, with the things that transpired, instead of leading by 3 points, we're leading by 17. So they were in and had all this up on the board, and we come in and they're doing this and that and the other, and we said, hey, Coach, wait a minute, go out and check the scoreboard, we're leading. And so that changed their whole philosophy the second half.
When you go to the Prattville experiment field, you expect to see different strains of crops or the effects of new pesticides. But you might be surprised to find that among several rows of cotton are some very carefully nourished weeds. They were planted there under the direction of Auburn University's weed science professor, Gail Buchanan.
Well, in this series of experiments, we're establishing thresholds of multi-weed systems. In earlier research, we had established the effects of red root pigweed and sickle pod on cotton. And in this study, we're looking at the effects not only of these 2 weed species on cotton, but also the effect of these 2 weed species on each other. And hopefully we'll be able to determine at what levels we get economic losses, which in turn will tell us at what levels we could expect an economic return for expenditures and weed control efforts.
Buchanan says his job is to determine when the cost of controlling weeds is greater than the amount of money lost if weeds are allowed to grow. When that happens, it may be wiser not to use weed control and simply absorb the loss. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
People seem to be harassed a great deal by debt collectors. Debt collectors have a tendency to call consumers all hours of the night. There is a law called the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, which regulates and controls the time period in which collectors can call consumers. The law also says that consumers can stop debt collectors from calling their home if they put that request in writing, but they also should be aware of the fact that the collector can take legal action against them. Just because you stop one from calling you does not mean that he does not have the right to collect on an uncollectible debt. Also, debt collectors cannot call your employer and tell them the nature of the business while they are calling you. They can call your employer and ask to speak to you. If you are not there, they can only leave a message that they call. They cannot state specifically the nature of the message.
Well, see, she doesn't think her brother loves her, and so she tries to get him to love her, but she tries to do everything for him, but she messes up a lot, and
that's about it, huh? There were a lot of people that were trying out for these parts. How many boys and girls showed up for the audition?
Around 500 or 600. It was a lot.
And what did you think when they called you and told you you were a finalist?
I was really excited. I had no idea, because I had never been in a movie or anything before, or commercial or anything like that.
When they gave you, or when you participated in the audition, they gave you just a script to read? Is that the way they did it?
Well, see, they matched you up with partners, and then they gave you a script and underlined certain parts that they wanted you to read, and then you had to read it in front of them. the man.
Okay, so, and now it's down to find out if you are going to get the part. And if you do, when will you be shooting the movie and where will you be shooting it?
In October sometime. They said it would take like 3 to 5 weeks to film the movie if I were to get it
And where's that going to be done?
in Mobile.
Well, Kelly, we wish you the best of luck, and we hope that that you are going to be starring in the movie, and we look forward to seeing you on the silver screen. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you for talking to us.
You're welcome.
Lager emphasized that the James administration is fundamentally committed to education. He took the opportunity to explain the state's new 6-point education program. One point of that program has received some strong opposition, particularly from Paul Hubbard of the AEA. That is, the basic skills teams. Lager defended the teams that will visit schools by invitation, working with teachers and principals to develop education materials and programs.
Now, Dr. Hubbard and many people who don't like our ideas, or don't like us, that's their privilege, talk about sending in pointy-headed liberal experts from Montgomery to Baldwin County, or to Greene County, or to Hale County to tell people how to teach school. Well, that's simply a bunch of hogwash. Any fool knows that if I come to your business or your school and start saying, now you do this and you do that and you sit over here and you come over there, if I've got some clout, you may do what I tell you, but the minute I'm gone, forget it.
School children like these are the ones that are ultimately affected by the education decisions of our state leaders. And Bob Lager says to ensure that they'll receive a quality education in the future, the control of schools must be returned to the teachers, and those teachers will need the full support of parents. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News.
And what it enables us to do is to try to buy mortgages in state and try to keep the monies given us by the state of Alabama and by the membership, try to invest it within our own state.
All right, you're taking bids this week on $40 million in the mortgages. What sort of rate of return is the RSA expecting?
We anticipate a rate of return somewhere around 10 3/8 to 10.5%.
Approximately 2,000 Alabamians make their living hauling sand and gravel for individuals and gravel companies. Owner driver Malcolm Brazel has already lost on the circuit court level, but he says more court action is on the way. Thomas Gaddy and George Dothert are in the same predicament and say they are the victims of discrimination because they are small operators.
They take the richer people and put them in a class by themselves and charge them less than half of what we pay. And they say because they're all treated equally that they're not discriminated against.
That's why you're in court?
That's it right there.
Your larger firms can haul their own material at times and then rent out or haul other material and still run the cheaper tag. And we have to run the more expensive.
How does that affect you in terms of being able to realize a profit in operating expenses?
It knocks down the negative. It's a negative on the negative side. In other words, it hurts us. It's running the little man out.
What's your situation?
Well, I pretty well agree with Getty. It just makes the license tag cost you about twice what it should. And it looks like to me we ought to have something done about it.
State officials say Malcolm Brazel and other truck drivers in his predicament have two areas of possible relief: the state court system and the Alabama legislature. But they add until a change is ordered, they will continue to obey the law. This is Norman Lumpkin, WSFA TV News at the State Department of Revenue.
They just decided that it would be best for them not to complete the agreement that we would be able to obtain the land.
Does this have anything to do with maybe any pressure from the population up in St. Clair County?
I would hope not. I do not know at this point, but I do not think so.
Okay. Now, where does this put you as far as a new prison now?
I'm fixing to leave here in a few minutes and start looking again. And it will not dampen our wishes for another prison. I've got to build 3, and I intend to find locations for all 3 prisons.
One is the economic drain that they foresee a prison having on that county, which I'm not sure that that's a reality. I think if you would find that in those counties where we've already located prisons, if you were going to take them away, the county people would be very upset. The other, of course, was the safety of the people in the county. But on the other hand, I pointed out to those people that we already have 67 prisons, it appears to me, in the state of Alabama now, because every county jail is housing prisoners, because we don't have the bed space to put them in state prisons, and they're far more, people of those counties are far more protected, I think, by having a prison than they would be locating prisoners in county jails.
She's a pinup of a different sort. She may not have as many curves as other centerfolds, but Overdrive magazine chose her as its rig of the month. Lee Mosley of Eclectic owns the 18-wheeler and hauls chemicals in her. The reason she's different is that Mosley special ordered her.
Well, it's geared best for the fuel mileage, plus it's geared best for the pulling of the hills and the amount of the load you pull.
I see. And what sort of honors come along with winning this?
You don't win that much. I think the prize is $150, plus, you know, your company gets a little advertisement out of it, and it's just the honor of getting the win. It's about one of the highest honors a trucker can get. Overdrive magazine Truck of the Month for nationwide. I think it's never been won by anybody in Alabama before, and I'm pretty proud of it.
Mosley's rig is the tallest truck Ford makes. She costs $64,000. That may seem like a lot of money for a pinup girl, but then Betty Grable didn't have 18 wheels. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
You're looking at Catholic High's football team, the entire team. Only 22 players tried out for the squad this year. As you would expect, depth is one of the Knights' biggest problems. However, Catholic does have some quality among those 22, mainly in the backfield. Quarterback Kevin Bates and back Donnie Lander.
All right, good job, yeah. Good job.
The Knights' most talented player is number 45, Ray Vollenweider. Last year, the running back was named All-City, All-Conference, All-State, and All-American. It doesn't appear he has slowed down during the offseason. Vollenweider and the 7 other seniors on the squad will be the key to the Knights' season.
We have 8 real fine seniors that our coaching staff really believe in, and they believe in one another. And we feel like that's going to be the key to our season, how successful we'll be. We were successful Friday night over St. Jude, and we feel like that they played a very important role in this aspect. And we're lacking in depth, but I believe we're going to make up for it with determination and willingness to work hard and willing to learn.
Depth and a lack of size are the Knights' biggest problems. Any injuries would make it hard to even field a team. But Coach Jack Hankins runs a loose team, and you get the impression that win or lose, football at Catholic High this year will be fun. Fred Albers, WSFA TV Sports.
The mayor told the city council he was unhappy with the number of crimes that occurred over the weekend, but he says a new system of dividing the city into patrol districts should help.
Which will hopefully be able to reduce the size of the existing patrol districts and put more coverage in the residential neighborhoods, which we're striving to do. I think we'll be ready with that in a week or so, and we'll be ready to put it into effect hopefully October the 1st. So this is going to be real good in being able to reduce the size of our existing patrol districts.
In other business, the council granted a $3,000 60-day option to Rice Bottling Company for the rights to buy some land in Gunter Industrial Park. The mayor said he was pleased with the success that park has had, and he pointed out that land has been broken on a similar industrial park in Hope Hull. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
we will do everything we can in a positive sense to locate a prison there. But if forced into it, once the right site is located for sure, we may have to commence condemnation proceedings. I hope that will not be necessary, and I'm very grateful for many of your leaders in Jefferson County for expressing support for prison in Jefferson County.
The cross-country flight of model airplanes began on the East Coast this weekend. The nation was divided up into 11 segments. In each of those segments, 5 teams fly their plane from one end to the other, where they meet with 5 teams from the next segment, who in turn fly their planes across their segment. Today, 5 planes flying across the segment, which includes Alabama, landed for an overnight stay in Montgomery. The spokesman for the Montgomery group is Gene Hanna.
Sponsored by the Academy of Model Aeronautics out of Washington, D.C., the home office in the Circus Casino in Las Vegas, which will be our landing spot.
Okay. Now, does each team have its own fundraising effort, or are all of them pre-planned?
No, each team is responsible for setting up its own fundraising effort within the city, and however they handle it is up to them.
Members of the Model Airplane Academy in Washington are traveling the entire trip officiating the marathon fundraising event. To raise money, patches and stickers are being sold. For those people in the 5 teams in each segment of the nation, awards are being handed out. At each stop, the Academy takes advantage of the time to show some of their other wares, like a flying lawnmower, The group will leave Montgomery in the morning for the next leg of their trip, which will take them to Meridian, Mississippi. The group hopes to land in Las Vegas near the end of the month, where it will contribute all of its money to muscular dystrophy. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
By resolution, the 1979 regular session of the Alabama legislature created a special committee on energy. The resolution charged that committee with examining current state law dealing with energy, court decisions, and to recommend legislation if such is needed. The special committee met for the first time in sort of a brainstorming session. At the meeting, the committee members discussed the areas they could examine. The vice chairman of the committee, Bill Smith of Huntsville, said perhaps the state could have its own Department of Energy. Senator Smith said this ongoing department could be the agency to work full-time toward placing Alabama at the forefront in the field of energy. Representative Pete Turnham, the chairman of the committee, said another good reason for the committee is the need for somebody to do something about energy rather than talking about it.
People are dissatisfied with the federal energy program, and yet maybe we as states have not done what we should, and I think this committee will be interested in seeing what Alabama can contribute to its own situation and to the national scene as well.
The Energy Committee will begin its examination of the problem with a presentation on gasohol at its next meeting. Other areas to be addressed include gasoline prices and coal production. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News at the Capitol.
We're talking about farm products.
The prosecution led by U.S. Attorney Barry Teague presented its case today against Randolph County Sheriff Charlie Will Thompson, Deputy Curtis Morrow, and 4 other Randolph County residents. The government's key witness was Robert L. Brown, Jr., who was also indicted in the case but pled guilty on August 27th. Brown testified he received a total of $1,000 from Sheriff Thompson on 5 different occasions with which to buy votes. Brown also said Thompson provided him with liquor to use in procuring votes. The prosecution presented 2 witnesses who testified they were paid money to vote for Sheriff Thompson. The cases against 2 of the defendants, M.L. Slim Johnson and William Richardson, were dropped because of a lack of evidence. The prosecution rested its case this afternoon. The defense begins its arguments tomorrow morning, and the jury is expected to get the case sometime early tomorrow afternoon. Michael Jones, WSFA TV News at the federal courthouse.
I sure am, Phil. I'm always, of course, worried about your opponent and worried about our team, I guess, how well we'll play, how hard we'll play, and how prepared we've been able to get our players. And
they have some talent, don't they?
Well, they sure do. You know, you can't underestimate your opponent. We're not underestimating Kansas State. They're talented at the skill positions. They're capable of scoring a lot of points. Their defense is improved. Their punter's a good punter. So we're going to have to play an excellent football game and be consistent and not make a lot of errors to hope to win.
You sounded this morning in the press conference like you weren't really well pleased with the preparation so far.
Well, I'm not as well pleased as I'd like to be. I think a few more days would help that. We still have some unanswered questions and things that maybe our players are going to take up the slack in those areas. We certainly hope so. I think we can be a good football team. I think we'll improve as we go along. I just got to assess where we are right now. That's the thing I think it concerns me.
The Department of Pensions and Securities outlined how it plans to utilize its $217 million budget for the current fiscal year. In a presentation before the board, Deputy Commissioner Gil Jennings said the money will be spent in 3 areas. More than $95 million will be used in financial assistance programs such as aid to dependent children, old age pensions, and individual and family grants. $45 million will be spent in the social service area, which includes daycare services and the work incentive program. The remaining $73 million will be used for administrative costs, such as employees' salaries and benefits. Where is the money coming from?
Our operational plan for the coming year's operation is a total of $217 million, of which approximately 67% is federal money, the remaining being state funding.
Well, it'll allow us to operate at the level that we operated last year and at the level that we operated before that. But it certainly will not allow us to meet, in my opinion, the needs of the citizens of Alabama.
The budget allows an additional 150 personnel to be hired in Jefferson County to improve services and eliminate errors. The money will also go towards paying 127 new food stamp workers needed to operate the program. Paul Roth, WSFA TV News.
Officials of the State Civil Defense Office say one of the advantages to a hurricane is the ability to prepare for it, and these people have been preparing. Operations Duty Officer David Oakes says this group's responsibility is to coordinate the efforts of the many involved agencies.
And our prime purpose right now is to monitor the storm, the path of the storm, its intensity, make sure that the counties, particularly to the south, have been advised of its path, where it's going, and what to expect in the way of rain, wind, potential damage. See if, monitor the action that they're taking with their people so that we can advise the appropriate officials up here of evacuation and such items as they'd be doing down there in the counties.
This office has already coordinated the evacuation of a great portion of Alabama's Gulf Coast and helped notify other officials further north of needed shelter and/or equipment. Representatives of the governor's office, state troopers, pensions and securities, and other officials are in the office to receive the possible calls for help from the southern counties. Oakes says this storm is considered one of the worst to hit the Gulf Coast this century. He urges residents of all areas to regard the hurricane as extremely dangerous. The job of the Civil Defense Office will not end with just the passing of Frederick.
Our big problem then will be making contact with the people for damage assessment to advise the appropriate state offices what work has to be done and where it has to be done.
Oakes says they are also coordinating efforts with the Northwest Florida officials in regard to providing shelter for evacuated Floridians. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
The most definite problem Montgomery faces is where to put the large number of evacuees flocking to the city. Motels are filled and the Coliseum has just been opened to take in the first 2,500 persons who need shelter. Mayor Emery Falmer has met with members of the sheriff, police, and fire departments, Red Cross, Salvation Army, and other organizations. If an emergency situation arises, the mayor will operate from this command post. He says the high winds could pose a bigger problem than heavy rains.
As bad as the localized flooding would be, the high winds would do the most damage. The high winds could come in and blow houses down, or blow roofs off, or blow limbs down and wires down, and this, of course, bothers us more than anything else.
Mayor Falmer says there is no need to panic, but anyone living in a mobile home that's not secured should spend the night somewhere else. All residents should stay close to home.
I think at the moment they should be prepared for the high winds as best they can, And when we sound the warning that and we will put it over the various media if in fact it does come, and at that time people should take cover in the center of their houses as best they can, stay away from a glassed area, and do as little moving about as possible.
The mayor says all city agencies are on alert, ready to deal with anything that comes. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
How you doing, Mr. Ray?
As soon as the Coliseum opened, its parking lot began filling up with pillow-toting evacuees. The McAndrew family came from Pascagoula, Mississippi, leaving home and friends behind.
Our house is about 10 blocks from the beach, and I hope it's still there tomorrow, and if it is, we're going to head back and see what we can do. And, you know, up to now, there's nothing we can do but meet the people, enjoy the night. There's nothing we can do down there, and I just pray to God that a lot of our friends that elected to stay there, you know, are alive tomorrow. The house can always be rebuilt, but, you know, the people we left behind is a very serious note.
The flight from Mississippi was especially inconvenient for McAndrew's daughter. It was her 13th birthday. Red Cross and Department of Pensions and Security workers registered the guests at the makeshift motel. The Coliseum's capacity is 2,500, but lodgers had to bring their own beds. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
Many people came to Montgomery all the way from the Gulf Coast simply because there was nowhere else to stay. Those who slept did so on benches, tables, or the concrete floor covered with a blanket. 2 of the evacuees were reported to have taken ill. No other injuries or accidents were reported. Just after sunrise, breakfast was served by the Red Cross to approximately 735 people from Mobile, Pensacola, Fort Walton Beach, and other coastal towns. Edie Gregory of the Red Cross supervised the operation at Garrett Coliseum and said they are not sure just when they'll be able to close their center.
Right now, we're planning definitely through supper time tonight. We're waiting on the civil defense. Most of these people that are here are from out of Pensacola, Fort Walton, and Mobile areas. And until the civil defense clears their area, we'll stay open as long as we have people to take care of.
While the hurricane is not expected to cause major problems for the Montgomery area, many of the evacuees were eyeing the weather, wondering just when they could go home. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News. In advance of the fierce winds are large numbers of evacuees who must be housed. Just where the people are placed is a problem which grows as the storm approaches. Centers have been set up in many areas. Montgomery Mayor Emery Falmer has discussed storm precautions with other state, county, and local officials, and he's prepared to operate from this command post in case of emergency. A particular concern are mobile home residents who live in trailers not secured. Falmer says they should spend the night elsewhere.
Well, I think at the moment they should be prepared for the high winds as best they can, and when we sound the warning that we will put it over the various media if in fact it does come, and at that time people should take cover in the center of their houses as best they can, stay away from a glassed area, and do as little moving about as possible.
Special shelters have been set up for people leaving mobile homes in the area. Maxwell Gunter personnel living in trailers are being asked to call the base billeting office at Building 119 at Maxwell Air Force Base. The Montgomery County School Board has opened Dunbar Elementary School near Raymer, also as a shelter for mobile home residents. Yet another shelter is Montgomery's Garrett Coliseum. Lisa Nielsen has the story.
This was downtown Mobile, Alabama tonight, almost a ghost town. Hurricane-force winds are now pounding the Gulf Coast. There have been reports of sustained winds at 90 miles per hour, gusting to 120 in some places, and tides 10 to 15 feet above normal are bearing down on this area. Interstates and highways are virtually empty. Some motorists, like the man driving this truck, have been forced off the road by high winds. This driver was rescued. Tens of thousands of people have been moved from their homes to evacuation centers, mostly schools. There was a power failure here, and there have been other failures throughout Mobile. Conditions in these places are not the best, but the centers are safer than a small home in the face of a raging hurricane. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Mobile, Alabama.
Bronner told the 40 Dixie Lions Club members that state employees have been asking for a self-insured health plan for nearly 10 years, and today they got it. The present program insures the 30,000 state employees through Blue Cross. The new plan, to be administered through retirement systems, will require more work.
The primary concern of a state employee is like anybody else, like in this room. You get tired of being ate up by inflation or premium increases each year. So for the first time in history, as long as I can remember at least, the cost to the state and the cost to the state employee for his or her dependent coverage is going to remain the same for 2 years in a row. We're going to use the same rate of this preceding year in next year's cost to them. And in addition to that, as I said, we anticipate that the state should save somewhere in the $1.5 to $2 million range.
With the money the state saves, a finance department spokesman says the state may be able to increase coverage for its employees. Lisa Nielsen, WSFA TV News.
State parks have about 40 to 60 million.
Officials of the Community Services Administration estimate close to 25,000 Alabamians are involved in Community Action Agency programs. How those programs can be improved to better serve the state's needy was the focal point of the 9th Annual Statewide Community Action Agency Conference in Montgomery. The 24 community action agencies in Alabama administer such programs as Head Start, home weatherization, and nutritional assistance. 80% of the money comes from the federal government, 20% from local support. This year, Alabama's community action agencies received a total of more than $7 million, which generates more than $30 million for program operation. District Supervisor Michael Griffith, who oversees the community action agencies in Alabama and Mississippi, is hopeful about next year's federal support.
We hope that we would have enough money in local initiative funding, which is what we provide for the community action agencies in this state, that there's 24 of them, to provide at least the same services, the same administrative support, with a slight possibility that we might be able to expand in some of the counties that are not now in the Community Action Agency network.
The three-day conference concludes on Friday. Paul Roth, WSFA TV News.
NBC News.
Hurricane Frederick packed all of the force that meteorologists had predicted it would. Shortly before midnight, Frederick moved inland, bringing its full force in on Mobile and the surrounding area. The large eye of the hurricane remained intact through the cross to land, but after several hours it began to dissipate. The violence of the storm, however, remained at hurricane strength. Winds in excess of 100 miles per hour slammed through the deserted port city, winds that weather officials say probably caused extensive damage. Frederick moved directly north of Mobile, failing to take a predicted northeasterly turn. Instead, Frederick continued moving directly northward, up the Alabama-Mississippi border. Meanwhile, Montgomeryans who had expected some of the brunt of the storm sat in relatively calm conditions as Frederick continued its path west of the capital city. Rain fell in Montgomery, but not the 4 to 6 inches that had originally been predicted. The hurricane has lost a great deal of its strength and is now downgraded to tropical storm level with winds below 75 miles an hour. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News.
Good evening. Hurricane Frederick was 100 miles wide when it hit the Gulf Coast, and it devastated Mobile, Alabama, Pascagoula, Mississippi, and other places along the coast. About 8 people lost their lives. There might have been more, but there were warnings well in advance, and about 400,000 people fled inland, and when their houses were wrecked, they were not in them. There was looting in the central city of Mobile. The storm, no longer a hurricane, has now moved northward. Reports from the scene.
Hurricane Frederick's 100-mile-an-hour winds pounded the Gulf Coast of Alabama for 8 hours through the night. This 4-year-old girl was killed when the winds blew over a mobile home. By dawn, the storm had finally moved through here, causing tremendous damage, and residents began the job of cleaning up. Mobile is still virtually shut down. Electrical power and telephone service are out in most places. Residents were asked to stay home, and looting has started. Alabama's governor declared martial law and called out the National Guard. This afternoon, National Guardsmen with loaded weapons began moving into business districts along the coast. Schools, gas stations, restaurants, and most stores are closed. But Jim Henderson's home improvement store was open and crowded with victims of the storm. And Henderson stayed open even though half his building had been destroyed by Frederick.
We came over to see what kind of damage was here and to get some stuff to take to my house to keep the rain, if it starts, out of my home. And we had people lined up here, so what am I going to tell these people?
Most people left the coast south of Mobile. That's one reason why so few were killed. There are dramatic reminders of Hurricane Frederick's 8-hour visit here. A giant freighter was blown out of the water. The winds flipped a DC-3 belly up. And there are grim reminders of Frederick in other places, like Pascagoula, Mississippi, 40 miles west of Mobile, where the hurricane slammed into the coast, demolishing buildings in a shipyard. And near Pensacola, Florida, high tides from the storm crushed beach houses and tossed sailboats ashore. Jim Cummins, NBC News, Mobile, Alabama.
South of Mobile, about 250 residents of the Dauphin Island area tried to make their way in an auto caravan back to the homes they'd evacuated on the coast and on the island. Cleanup crews worked ahead of the caravan, slowly clearing the way. But it was futile. A few miles down the road, the hurricane washed out a bridge. And beyond that, 2 miles of causeway had disappeared into the Gulf of Mexico, cutting off Dauphin Island from the mainland. We reached the island by helicopter. Boats there were piled up. Scores of homes were destroyed. And 27 of the island's residents who had chosen to ride out the storm there were now salvaging what was left. What was left of the country store Ben Berger ran there for 24 years. Last night, it was leveled in a few seconds, with Berger and 6 others in it.
Well, it sounded like a terrific boom. You thought the world was coming to an end and everything was flying and things were falling on top of us, and we had to dig our way out and then tried to regroup, find out where everyone was.
Berger and the others spent the rest of the night under wrecked furniture, shielding themselves from the fierce winds. The Dauphin Islanders' drinking water is running low. So is fuel, because the island's 2 gas stations are wrecked. And they didn't even know the causeway was out until we told them. About all they could be thankful for is that no one was killed on the island last night. Robert Hager, NBC News, Dauphin Island, Alabama.
This is the way Hurricane Frederick looked on radar as it moved ashore about 9:30 last night.
The eye of the storm is clearly visible in this color radar display from NBC affiliate WSFA TV in Montgomery. By midnight, the picture looked like this, as the hurricane, still with a pronounced eye, began to spread out. As it spread out, with the center moving almost due north along the Alabama-Mississippi border, Frederick also lost a lot of its punch. By early afternoon, the hurricane had been downgraded to a tropical storm, and winds had diminished to about half the force they were when they hit the coast, as the storm began turning slightly to the northeast. This radar picture, taken at 1:30 this afternoon, showed light to moderate areas of rain, but there was, and still is, the threat of tornadoes along the storm's path. Finally, this picture, taken early this evening, shows the storm moving across northern Alabama and toward northern Georgia and eastern Tennessee, where its remnants are expected to be tonight. Kenley Jones, NBC News, Montgomery, Alabama.
In Washington, President Carter declared parts of Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida disaster areas. 30 counties were hurt by the storm. The White House said Mr. Carter will fly tomorrow to Alabama and Florida for a first-hand look at the wreckage.
13 and a half minutes past the hour now. One of the things I've never been able to understand about storms in this country, or try to understand, what happens after people get together and save each other and bail each other out in the wake of a storm like Hurricane Frederick, and then have problems with something like looting. We're going to get a report on all of that this morning from Jim Cummins, who is standing by in the early morning light of suburban Mobile, there amidst the destruction. James?
That's right, Tom. The governor of Alabama has declared martial law. A dusk to dawn curfew is in effect. The National Guard is enforcing it. And the refrain, shoot to kill, is being heard a lot around here. Another problem in the wake of Hurricane Frederick. This was the scene in a Mobile neighborhood shopping center yesterday. Some of these people, many of them youngsters, were helping themselves to merchandise in wind-damaged, abandoned stores. This is Pritchard, a suburb of Mobile with 50,000 residents. Pritchard was one of the areas hit hardest by the hurricane. It did plenty of damage here. There has been looting of stores in Pritchard. This town has become the focus of a dispute over that. When the governor sent the National Guard in here, he warned looters that, quote, they take their life into their own hands. He promised to deal with them in the most severe fashion. Some local police officials interpret that to mean shoot to kill. One mayor has made the same interpretation. The mayor of Pritchard, A.J. Cooper. Mayor Cooper is with us now. He is a man with impressive credentials. He was the first black to beat an incumbent white mayor in the history of Alabama. He's the past president of the Black Mayors Conference. He could also be characterized as a law and order mayor. And maybe you could explain why. What was the order you gave hours after the hurricane passed through your city?
Our orders were to stop the looting, to establish a police presence so that those who had intentions to loot would change their minds. Our instructions to our police officers were to fire 2 warning shots and then shoot to stop those individuals who refused to obey police instructions.
Shoot to kill.
That can be an interpretation. If we can shoot them in the foot and accomplish the purpose, I'd prefer to shoot them in the foot.
Why such a tough stance? Or do you consider it tough?
You know, I don't consider it tough. We've had total devastation here. We don't want citizens taking the law in their own hands. We've already had several occasions where looters have fired at store owners had fired at looters. We're going to enforce the law here. We're not going to have vigilantes doing it themselves. This is going to be for a very limited period of time, and we think it's an appropriate response given the situation.
Even before Hurricane Frederick came through here, you had asked the governor of Alabama to declare an emergency in your city. Is that any kind of vote of confidence in the people of your city to ask the governor to declare an emergency because you're afraid of looting?
That's not why the emergency was asked to be declared. The reason why we asked for the emergency to be declared was so that we could require evacuation. We requested it some 18 hours before the hurricane actually hit. In retrospect, it seemed like an awful bright thing to do.
Do you think this is going to hurt or help you politically? Or do you care?
Frankly, I could give less than a damn. What I'm concerned about at this point is protecting life first, property second, and doing what I consider to be the appropriate thing.
The controversy that I alluded to in the tape portion of this was the fact that over the years, the expression shoot to kill has been interpreted by some black people to be just another code expression for shoot black people.
Well, first place, many of my police officers are black. Many of our National Guardsmen here in Alabama are black. Many of our store owners are black. The looting is being done by whites. It's being done by blacks. I'll chat with you about the sociology after we batten down the hatches from this hurricane. I probably suggest that the controversy is more media-inspired than anything our local citizens are concerned about.
And how did the first night of the curfew go in your city?
Very well. Once we've established what we're going to do, secondly, established the police and National Guard presence, we find when you give leadership, people follow it.
How long do you think it's going to take for your community, Pritchard, to recover from the storm?
The immediate recovery process will probably take 2 to 3 weeks. After that, it'll probably take 2 to 3 years.
You're talking about rebuilding Pritchard from the damage. What kind of feedback are you getting from the citizens of Pritchard regarding things like electrical power and the other problems that they've had in cities like Mobile, which we have focused on in most of the coverage here?
Let me tell you, the people have been super. When asked to evacuate, they went. When asked to stay off the streets, they did it. They are cooperating in every way. They're not complaining. They know we've got a problem. We're providing some ice. We're going to provide food. We've got 700 naval people coming in here Saturday morning to help clear streets. The folks have been super.
And what are the plans, the long-term plans for Pritchard, 6 months down the road?
First is to get Jimmy Carter this morning to bring some cabinet officers down here behind him to buttonhole Jack Watson and make sure that we can pull in the bucks that it's going to take to solve the problem.
What are you going to ask President Carter? Do you have anything specific in mind in the wake of the storm?
No, frankly, the only thing we want President Carter to do is give marching orders to his cabinet people and his administration people to cut the red tape and start the money flowing, and the local government officials can do the rest.
How much money would it take to rebuild your city, Pritchard?
Probably about $200 million. Countywide, we're probably looking at $700 million to $1 billion. We're talking about private damage, public capital construction, things of that nature.
One of the things that has struck the reporters and the visitors to this area about this storm and the way the people reacted to it was the preparation they had made. Was Pritchard as ready for the storm as some of the areas on the coastal region were?
Oh, certainly. We've spent 10 years with our Civil Defense Agency getting ready for something like this, hoping it would never come. Preparation is wise. I recommend it.
And law and order seems to be working in your community right now, the Get Tough policy?
That's your interpretation. We just think it's good, sound municipal government management.
Okay. So there you have it. Law and order in Pritchard worked overnight, and according to the mayor of Mobile, they had no problems here as well. The curfew is working. The emergency, declared by the governor, is still in effect, and the National Guard is still with us here and probably will be for several days. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Jim Cummins. Mr. Mayor, nice to have you with us this morning, even under these very grim circumstances. 21 minutes now past 8 o'clock.
President Carter visiting the Gulf Coast today to inspect the devastation inflicted by Hurricane Frederick. The president has designated 30 counties in Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida as major disaster areas eligible for federal aid. We have a late report from Sandy Gilmore in Mobile, Alabama.
All last night, the Alabama National Guard patrolled, armed, enforcing a curfew along with Mobile police to prevent looting. Along 100 miles of Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida coastline, the force of Frederick seemed incalculable. An oil tanker thrown up on its side. Pleasure boats, dozens of them, smashed in one pile, left stranded on dry land. Enough wind to roll a DC-3. Waves strong enough to blow a cinder block and brick house on a Florida beach down to its frame. to destroy almost all of the possessions of John and Patty Perkins.
I had been braced. John had been out here earlier, but I was just sick. It's the only way I can describe it. There's nothing left in there. The carpets are washed out. Everything's gone.
The oak trees twisted and snapped, the sand dunes pulverized, the power lines shorted and arcing, the flooding. Most all of this was impossible to see while it was happening night before last, but yesterday tens of thousands of evacuees returned home to inspect for themselves, to begin the cleanup, to call relatives when the phones began working, to feel relieved when some street lights came back on.
It's been 36 hours since Hurricane Frederick hit these coastal waters. The residents have had some time to look at the widespread destruction. Today, they must start to rebuild. Sandy Gilmore, NBC News, Mobile, Alabama.
And Jim Cummins will have more on the impact of Hurricane Frederick right after the news and weather.
Air Force One arrived at Bates Field about 10 o'clock. The president and a host of other officials, including many members of the White House press corps, filed off the plane to meet local officials. The president talked with Governor Bob James, Florida Governor Bob Graham, and Mississippi Governor Cliff Finch briefly before addressing the waiting media. Carter said he was impressed at the way Governor James and others had prepared for the storm, and said the evacuation of the areas beforehand was the largest in the history of the United States. The president also promised federal aid to help rebuild the areas along the Gulf Coast.
Our aid to this area has been approved by me. I think the quickest declaration of an emergency that I've ever had since I've been president. And we will continue this aid not just for a few days or a few weeks, but on a long and sustained basis until the damage caused by this hurricane has been repaired. This might take not only months but several years, but we will be here working with local and state officials to make sure that the damage is repaired as best we can, and also that adequate aid is provided.
The president, Governor Bob James, and other officials climbed aboard the presidential helicopter for a close-up look at the destruction along the Mississippi, Alabama, and Florida Gulf Coast. The president was scheduled to return to Washington from Pensacola, Florida. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News, Bates Field, Mobile.
Highways leading into Mobile are streaming with Port City residents on their way back home. Although some major thoroughways are open, a good many other roads are still cluttered with debris. The major problem in Mobile centers around electricity. Utility crews from several states are working on repairs, but officials say it will be several days before most of the power is turned back on. Because there is no power, water, food, and light sources are scarce commodities. Power shortages have also closed down most gas stations who haven't already become storm victims. Those stations who are open have very long lines of people waiting for their share of gas. The damage is extensive. Everywhere you turn are bits of evidence that Frederick was in fact a ferocious hurricane. Those residents not involved in emergency services are at home trying to remove tree limbs from their roofs, fallen brick walls from their yards, and in general just trying to clean up. In downtown Mobile, the debris is also very heavy. Some business owners are already replacing the glass blown out by the winds which roared through the streets at speeds in excess of 100 miles per hour. The airports are jammed with people coming into the city. Car rental services have called in extra autos from other states. All evidence that those hundreds of thousands who left the city are now desperately trying to get back to what's left of their homes and lives. Chris Grimshaw, WSFA TV News, Mobile.
Hurricane Frederick came ashore near Mobile Wednesday night, destroying countless homes, businesses, and resulting in at least a dozen deaths. The loss of life could have been higher, except for the massive evacuation. The latest storm-related deaths resulted from fires, reportedly started by lamps or candles being used for light in the power blacked-out areas. The suffering from loss of property and life is great, but now the returning residents are finding more problems. Ice, a valued commodity, since there is no electricity for refrigeration, when it's found is selling for up to 20 times its normal price. The situation is so bad that Mobile officials are giving away ice at several points around the city. Other items, such as chainsaws and electric generators, are bringing high prices. Gasoline has also taken a big jump. This station was charging over $1.40 per gallon, and still the lines were long. $500 fines are being handed out for price gouging. Looting is still a problem, but city officials say the situation is under control. Vandals are even reportedly scraping the insulation off of the miles of downed power lines and selling the copper for scrap metal. Drinking water is in short supply. The city of Mobile has passed an ordinance regulating the use of water. Some businesses were beginning to wash down their buildings, and this threatened the city's water pressure. In the face of this adversity, power company officials say it could be weeks before power is restored to customers in the Mobile area. President Carter visited the stricken area Friday and has promised massive federal help in rebuilding. Dennis Latham, WSFA TV News.
Alabama agriculture officials were worried about what high winds and rain would do to the state's crops. Although crops in the Gulf Coast region may be lost or partially destroyed, soybeans and cotton in south-central Alabama appear to have weathered the storm quite well. Montgomery County Associate Agent Bobby Hanks.
The soybean situation, I think, still looks real good in the county. We have a few plants that's lodged, but not a whole lot of them. The cotton situation right here in Montgomery County, around the edges of some of the fields, we've lost some cotton, but overall it still looks real good. But I have some reports from up in Autauga County that some cotton has been lost. Other than that, I think everything's looking real good, but we still need some rain. You know, we didn't get about 87/100ths of an inch of rain in this thing, and so we need some more rain now to get these late planted soybeans filled on out, you know, so we can have a real good crop of soybeans.
Hanks